Takes a bit of time. Well, e4, e5 is his main weapon. He adjusts all his pieces. That's what Magnus likes to do. Just be there in the zone. Doesn't matter if you use 10 seconds or 15. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. We have the Italian d3 played. Generally, you bring your bishop out to c5. But Magnus wants to be solid here. He goes bishop e7. White short castles. Black short castles here. And now knight comes out to c3. Keeping an eye on the d5 square, Magnus pushes his pawn. a4 played to make a square for the bishop on a2. And a5 gaining back the space on the queen side. Alireza goes rook e1. Maybe trying for the d4 break at some point. Just bolstering the center here. The big difference, of course, is the difference in activity of the bishop. Black bishop is a bit passive, while white bishop is outside the pawn chain. Bishop e6 played. Do you want to take and double the pawns? Do you want to let black take? Oh, knight d5 played in by Alireza. And he is putting pressure here and on the knight on f6. You can already take on d5, ed5 and knight b4 trying to attack this pawn, and that's what Magnus would be calculating. But then there comes the move d4 and perhaps e4, knight d2. Magnus doesn't want to get into these complications, which is why he plays the move h6. Just slowly improving his position. Useful move. But c3 feels like the right way to continue. c3, maybe d4. You go c3, h3. Just improve the position here. Alireza taking his time. He's also weighing the consequences of getting the bishop pair here. But actually it helps black because then the remaining pieces are all nicely positioned. Although white does have the bishop pair there. And Alireza taking his time here. He is ahead on the clock by a few seconds. So it does make sense to think through here what he wants to do. He goes pawn to c3 and Magnus brings his rook to e8. Again, one of those little moves that Magnus plays, which is, difficult for many players to make very quickly. They need to weigh the consequences of each move. But Magnus knows that the bishop goes to f8. The rook comes here. g6, bishop g7 could be an important maneuver. And now Alireza, does he want to do something very concrete with queen b3? Yes, he goes in. And you have to be careful here. b7 pawn is hanging. Also, the pressure on the e6 point is rising. And now the usefulness of rook e8 comes into existence. If knight f6, bishop f6, and you will see that the rook protects here. Wow. That was something deep by Magnus, foreseeing that this could happen. He defends the b7 pawn. And now d4 is very good. But Alireza plays h3, which is also fine. He's asking Magnus, what's your next plan here? And Magnus Carlsen also just trying to see what all he can do. Bishop f8 looks very natural. There's also this move knight d7 with the idea of coming to c5 with your knight. That could be very useful. How about knight h7 to g5, bishop f8 played. And now bishop comes out to e3. And Alireza just, I think, at some point wants to go d4, but also just getting the other rook into the game. And black, to tell you the truth, is a little bit passive here. So Magnus decides to go into concrete mode. He takes the knight with his bishop on d5. And you can take back with the bishop, but taking with the pawn seems very, very logical here. Pawn takes d5. And Alireza does it. Pawn takes on d5. Knight goes back to e7. He's kind of putting pressure here on the d5 pawn. but it's defended, and d4 looks natural, but Alireza gets a bit greedy. He goes after the b7 pawn. Wow, he takes it here, and now queen c8 is a great move. Queen c8, but there's also a possibility to take here. Take, and rook a7. But he goes queen c8. He's offering a trade of queens. And Alireza takes it. Rook takes. Now the bishop is hanging on a7, so bishop comes back. Magnus takes the pawn on d5. He feels confident here, and he's attacking the bishop on e3. Bishop goes back to d2. Knight to b6 now. This is the phase where Magnus starts to play like a genius, guys. Now, notice carefully. The bishop is attacked, so you need to save it. Bishop b3, and now c5. Makes this move super quick. Understands that the weakness of d5 square or d6 pawn doesn't matter. c4 is coming in here. Already for me, this move is amazing. But okay, Firouzja has to respond back to this carefully. I don't know, maybe bishop c2. He goes d4. He tries to be very, very concrete. And this is why Firouzja is a dangerous opponent. He doesn't let his opponent settle down. And that applies also to Magnus here. Pawn takes pawn, and e4 played by Magnus, pushing the knight away. The knight doesn't have too many squares. Goes knight to h4, looking at the f5 square now. And knight to c4. Magnus goes after the bishop and the pawn. And I think you should take it. But he decides to go bishop c3, defending the pawn. And now g6 is the best move here. The move g6 takes into control the f5 square. He does play pawn to g6. And Magnus once again showing that he has things under control. Maybe g3 followed by knight g2, knight e3. You need to get this knight into the game. And time wise, both players have roughly 2 minutes on the clock. Magnus slightly ahead. Then Firouzja finds g3. Brilliant. Firouzja matching Magnus move for move as of now. Now, I would love to play knight d5, but I have to assess the consequences of rook e4. But look at this. Takes, and there's knight d2 fork. Beautiful. So actually knight d5 works. But these tactics have to be worked out. And with 2 minutes on the clock, sometimes it's not so easy to even think about these moves. Moves that come to your mind are rook b8, trying to attack here, but then bishop takes, rook takes, and you lose the pawn on a5. So maybe not so easy. And Magnus having a unusually long think in this position. When the move began, he had 2 minutes, 15 seconds. But he finds knight d5, taking 50 seconds on the clock. 1 minute, 25 seconds. Wow. Incredible. And he works out these tactics, rook e4, knight c3 and knight d2, which just puts opponent under some pressure. Maybe bishop a2 makes a lot of sense, because then this pawn is hanging and you can't play f5 because g6 would be hanging. Yeah, so Firouzja can actually put some serious pressure on Magnus by playing bishop a2. But if you play something like rook c1, then I still don't have to worry about rook e4, I believe, because of this knight c3 and knight d2 business. So Firouzja needs to move. Man, both the players are taking a bit of too much time here. He goes rook c1, and Magnus gets another move to improve his position. Maybe rook b8. Rook b8 here. Plays it. Rook b8 attacking the bishop. If you take, rook takes c4. If you take here, then maybe the a4 pawn is hanging. So Alireza saves his bishop to a2. Can't take on b2 as the d5 knight is hanging, but you can chop off the bishop on c3. He takes it. Knight takes c3. Rook takes. And now a very important move, which is to play d5. Defending the knight, defending the pawn. And also preparing bishop b4 to skewer the rooks. Also the knight on h4 is a bit out of the game. d5 pushes forward. And now if you take the rook on c4, take rook e4, I have rook b2 and the c pawn is super strong. So Alireza goes rook e2, defending the b2 pawn. And Magnus now has bishop g7 to attack the d4 pawn, getting another of his guy into the game. Finds it. Bishop to g7. Man, Magnus so good. And you can see how he takes time for his moves. Rook takes c4. Takes. Maybe it's time to take the pawn on e4. But he goes rook d2. But now Magnus is better. He can go rook b4. But the d pawn could run. Rook b3 played. Wow. That's a very interesting move. I guess he wants to go rook to d3. Knight g2, rook d3 found. Rook c2, he takes the pawn on d4. Maybe if you take here, I have check and you lose f2. So king f1 played. And this is where you need to convert it accurately. c3 is the best move after takes. Rook c3, black is winning. But Magnus is very low on time. He has 20 seconds. Firouzja has 5 seconds. He goes f5. Not a good move. Rook takes c4. He can take it. He takes it. Bishop, rook d2 and knight f4. Mistake. He should have gone knight e3 and he would have been fine. But bishop f2 taken. Pawn to g4. Both players down to their last few seconds. You can see the adrenaline pumping there. Knight comes back. And Magnus finds bishop d6. He's coming in with his pawns. Pawn takes. Rook, knight d4. Attacking this pawn on f5. e3 played. Knight f5 met with rook f2, winning here. Finds such incredible tactics. f4 played. Again rook c3, f3. Takes the rook. King takes and oh, he resigns. He's a piece down. And what a finish there. In the time pressure, Magnus finding one good move after another. And that was insane what happened in the end. I think Magnus just showed superior blitz skills in that moment. He gets off from the board. Alireza is left thinking, how did he lose that one? Well, let's have a look at those final moments which really